I don't know if you guys hold on. Just bear with us here. Bear with us. Okay, are we good now, chat? Let us know in the chat if we're good now. But
it's been an adventurous day.
It's been an insane day, and after an insane week of college football, I believe we're back now. So I hope someone lets us know in the chat. I know my mom's in the chat. She says sounds coming in and out right now. So hopefully bear with us. Hopefully we'll get this going in just a little bit. Dalton, not as loaded of a week of college football as we've had in previous weeks, but I think there's still a lot of games that are really intriguing to talk about today.
You talk about it all the time. These quote unquote lighter slates always bring that circus action, right? We've already had it a couple of times this year, and even though there's not maybe a Georgia versus Alabama on this slate, we got a couple of top 10 teams apparently on upset alert. They're underdogs, right? We got some closer games. We got some games that, and once you're in conference games too, standings always matter. Every win matters once you're in conference games, and especially with the automatic qualifier with the conference title winners. Getting to those conference title games matter. Every one of these games matters all the same. It feels like they're not as big, but they still are big one week at a time, right?
I've always said that the weeks where you look at the slate and you say, oh, this isn't really a great slate of college football. That's always the most chaotic slate of college football. So we actually don't two games in week 6 where top 10 teams are underdogs heading into their game. And one of them that we're talking about, the first one we're talking about today, is the only ranked game in week 6. That is number 9 Missouri at number 25 Texas A&M. That's at noon Eastern time on ABC. The storyline to know was that this is really Missouri's kind of toughest game yet so far this season. Missouri's season can kind of be split into two distinct halves. They took care of business against Murray State and Buffalo, and beat them by a combined score of 89-0. And the following 2 weeks, they played Boston College and Vanderbilt, who are way better teams than Murray State and Buffalo. And they only won by a combined 9 points, and they went to overtime with Vanderbilt. What those first 4 games all share in common, though, is that they're all played in Columbia, Missouri. This is the first time all year Missouri is on the road, and they're taking on number 25 Texas A&M, and what should be their toughest game of the season so far.
No, absolutely. I mean, and plus you're going into Kyle Field. It's always a tough road environment there. And Missouri, honestly, they haven't played their best football yet, despite being 4-0, despite their point differential being really, really wide. I mean, they had 2 easy wins the first two weeks of the year, and then tough wins against Boston College and Vanderbilt, and now getting maybe even a little bit more of a step up with Texas A&M. So we'll see if Missouri can play better football or if they were rightfully made underdogs in this game.
Absolutely. So, Don, you have the Missouri offense in this one. What should we be looking out for when the Tigers have the ball?
Yeah, it's just kind of this thing where they have all the talent in the world, right? They had their top 5 receivers come back. Their starting quarterback came back. They still have a good offensive line. You've got 2 good backs in Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. They are just not playing their best football, and they don't have the same level of explosiveness right now that they did last year. And if we compare what they did, I think especially on targets of 10 or more yards between last year and this year, you look at passing grade, Missouri was 16th last year. They're 82nd this year. Receiving grade, 18th last year, 104th this year. Completion percentage on 10-plus yard targets, 22nd last year, 83rd this year. Right now, they're just not finding that explosiveness, that rhythm, that level of execution, even though it's all of the same guys and really explosive players. Obviously, Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, Marquise Johnson, and Brady Cook just not making the throws that we saw him make a lot of the times last year. So it just looks to me, I don't know if they're sleepwalking through the earlier part of their schedule. I don't know if it's just not firing on all cylinders right now, but we're getting this thing with Missouri where they're just not playing up to their full potential, right? And they're not as explosive as they were last year, at least through 4 games. Now, you get a bye week to try to figure these things out. Maybe there's something in practice. Maybe it's just some timing things, because it's all the same talent, and it's big-time talent. We talk about all the time how loaded Missouri is, especially at wide receiver. There really isn't a reason that they should have this big of a drop-off. They're just not executing. So I think when you look at the way they've won games so far, they've won it with balance. Their defense has played well. Their running game and offensive line have gotten them through it. But now you get to the part of your schedule. To me, they have this A&M game, and they have a couple more games before their biggest game of the year at Alabama, where they need to figure this out. because if they're not as explosive as we thought they were, they're not going to be a playoff team. The idea behind them being a playoff team is they had all this offensive firepower, and right now it's just not clicking for whatever reason. It's there's nobody hurt, nobody's injured, and nobody's playing super poorly. But look, this might be a get right spot though against A&M, even though it's at Kyle Field right now. Texas A&M is 94th in the nation in coverage grade and 96th against 10-plus yard targets. Okay, and they haven't given up a ton of explosive completions. But a lot of that, when you throw on the tape, is that they've played some subpar quarterbacks, and those guys are missing throws as well. This game, to me, just comes down to Missouri executing at a higher level than they did in their first 4 games, despite getting 4 wins in those games. They just need to play better.
Absolutely, yeah. So Brady Cook and those receivers have to play better, but at least we know who the quarterback will be for Missouri. We do not know who the quarterback's going to be for Texas A&M because Connor Wigman obviously entered the year as the number 1 quarterback in the draft, and for us at least, for PFF, and he had a poor performance in week 1 against Notre Dame, and then he injured his throwing shoulder in week 2 against McNeese State and hasn't played since. So the season opener was rough against Notre Dame, but he has shown high-level play before as a passer. He had a 90.9 passing grade in 4 games last year, 85.9 passing grade against McNeese State before going down with an injury. And then when he got hurt, redshirt freshman Marcel Reed was inserted, and he has a 3-0 record now as a starter this season. Still relatively unrefined, though, as a passer this year. He has a 59.2% adjusted completion rate, which if you don't know, adjusted completion rate is basically your completion percentage plus any drops that your receivers have. So 59.2%, that's the lowest among any Power 4 quarterback this year. But what he does add is game-breaking ability as a runner. He has 211 rushing yards since becoming the starter in week 3. That's 9th among all quarterbacks in the country in that span. And Missouri, their 2 one-possession games this year came against schools who feature mobile quarterbacks in Thomas Castellanos and Diego Pavia. The Tigers did a good job of bottling up Castellanos. He only had 32 rushing yards in that game. But Pavia had 96 rushing yards in that one. Remember, that game went to overtime as well. So Castellanos, if you go back and watch the tape of that, most of his rushing attempts were designed runs for him, where Pavia made a lot of his damage as a scrambler. And Reed is kind of on par with him as a runner, but he's not on par with him as a passer because both Castellanos and Pavia have passing grades above an 85 this year. Reed only has a 59.5 passing grade. So it's going to be interesting to see who plays in this game because Connor Wigman every week is entering the year with entering every week with a questionable designation. So he might be the quarterback. He might not be the quarterback. I feel like it'll be Marcel Reed again, considering they've won every game he started this year. But right now, if you look at the Missouri run D is the biggest strength of the defense right now. They're 25th in run defense grade. So Wigman, as a better passer than Marcel Reed, he probably presents more of a threat against Missouri, but you do sacrifice some ability with him as well when you don't have Marcel Reed in there. So it's going to be interesting to see what quarterback is out there for Texas A&M against Missouri.
Yeah, it is 2 completely different styles, but they do seem to be in a rhythm with Reed, right? At least the mobility, and you have 2 pretty good backs in Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels who have played well, so they've really gotten the run game going in this stretch, and especially back in the Florida game when they just ran all over them, right? And they've embraced kind of what Reed is and built this offense a little bit more around him as they've gone on. So it is a challenge for Missouri not knowing which one to prepare for, but I'm kind of with you. I have to assume that they're preparing for Reed, and if they have to adjust back to Wigman, who is a much more traditional passer, I think easier to prepare for, with him being kind of a pocket passer, a guy who likes to throw over the middle, probably something that they're more used to, right? And it's not as stressful on a defense, not the dual threat guy. So it is an interesting situation at A&M. And you were saying that about Wigman and being questionable every week. And I go back to like last year with Utah and Cam Rising, right?
This year with Cam Rising too.
I guess this year with Cam Rising too. Yeah. Where it's just like, we don't know and we'll just kind of loosely prepare accordingly.
Yeah.
And it can be the same way for a defensive coaching staff too, not knowing which one that you're getting because they're 2 very different guys.
I feel like A&M probably knows who's starting on Saturday. They're just not revealing it because they don't want Missouri to be able to prepare for that.
Right.
So it makes sense. But so Dalton, who do you right now Texas A&M is favored by 2 points over Missouri. Does Missouri suffer their first loss of the season, or will the Tigers win in the only ranked game of the weekend?
I think this game goes one of 2 ways. Either Missouri starts executing better and they really made use of their bye week to just start playing better and get more in sync and really kind of re-rev the engine as opposed to the way they've played the first 4 games, and they really handily win this because they're the more talented team. Or they find themselves in a close game, again, like they did against BC and Vandy, or falling behind early, and they could actually lose this one. I think if it's a close game, I'd be very worried about Missouri and just the lack of execution finally, because you keep playing those tightrope games every single week, you get burned eventually, even if it's a team that you think isn't as good as you are. I'm going to take the former. I think Missouri, I still think they're a playoff team, potentially, right? And I think to be a playoff team, they have to go in and win a game like this, but they do have to play better. I do think if they play better than they've played their first 4 games, especially offensively and Brady Cook and the passing game, they could win this game pretty handily. I'm going to go that route. I've got Missouri 34-20.
Yeah, I'm taking Missouri as well, 27-23 over Texas A&M. You mentioned before, Texas A&M secondary is vulnerable. And I think if there's a get-right game for Missouri in that passing game, it is this one against Texas A&M. And it will be interesting, though. I think it'll be a close game, and remember, it is the first road game for Missouri this year, and Kyle Field is one of the best home environments in college football, so that should play a factor as well. But I still think Missouri will end up winning this game 27-23 over Texas A&M and continue their undefeated season so far. Let's go over to the next noon game we're talking about, and that is SMU at number 22 Louisville. Again, noon Eastern time on ESPN. Really, the storyline for this one, Dalton, is the winner of this game pretty much becomes the leader of the second tier of ACC teams. Because right now there's a pretty clear gap between Miami, Clemson, and everyone else. They're the only top 15 teams in the AP poll from the ACC. Louisville at number 22, the only other one in the top 25 from the ACC. And SMU was one of 2 other ACC schools who had votes in the AP poll, and Boston College being the other one. So the winner of this game between SMU and Louisville will establish himself as the new challenger to the Tigers and Hurricanes in the ACC right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, SMU already has a loss to BYU, but that loss as time has gone on, it looks a lot better considering the way BYU has played. And I think they've started to really just figure out, their offensive line situation they had to figure out earlier in the year, and they're starting to get that going. And you know what? Sticking with Kevin Jennings, and we talked about this when they were going back and forth between Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings. It frustrates you because they came into the year with Stone and he was coming off the injury, but it's hard to play both, right? Same kind of thing we've talked about with Florida, with Mertz and Lagway, where it's like, just pick one guy and run with it. It appears they've picked Jennings, and that's fine, and they went out and played TCU and played a great game and really beat down TCU in the rivalry game. Now you get into ACC play and you really start to test the gauntlet with SMU and seeing if they can play Power 5 teams week in and week out, right? It's still their first year in the ACC, but you're right. These are 2 of the teams that we thought could be at least dark horse contenders in this conference.
Absolutely. So, Dawn, you have the Louisville offense in this game. What should we be looking out for when the Cardinals have the ball?
It's all about play action with Jeff Brom and the way they operate. They want to run the ball. They didn't run the ball great last week against Notre Dame. It was decent. There was a lot of things they didn't do great against Notre Dame last week, and they still only lost by 7. They lost last week's game because they made a lot of mistakes. When they don't make those types of mistakes, this is a really good offense, and the most lethal part of it is play action. So you see that with Tyler Shuck, okay? When he's in play action, when he runs play action passes, 90.6 passing grade, which is the 11th best in the country. He's got the 6th most play action passing yards, 6 big-time throws so far, and a very high average depth of target. That's the 12th highest average depth of target at 14.6 yards. So when they get in play action, they're not looking to throw the ball in the flat and get 4 yards. They're looking to take home run shots. And you look at this SMU defense, right, and they've played well. They've got a high defensive grade. I would say the weakest part of their defense is the cornerbacks. It's just there's 2 things that would worry me for if I'm SMU's defense: the play action and Louisville's ability to throw outside the numbers. They're very good at stretching the field horizontally and deep down the field. And Tyler Shuck is good at making those throws, go balls and double moves coming off play action. And Ja'Cory Brooks has been a really good vertical threat for them. I think Louisville's ability to get into their play act, get ahead of the chains with the run game, get into their play action, and throw the ball down the sidelines. Because what you're seeing from SMU's corners is a lot of those fakes or double moves or things like that. They get caught looking in the backfield.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not that they don't have the ability to cover, but there's a lot of mental mistakes on the back end, especially outside towards the numbers. So if Louisville can get in their wheelhouse of play action and throwing outside the numbers, I think they could put up a lot of points on SMU for sure.
Absolutely. So my side of the ball is SMU, and really Kevin Jennings, the guy that we did not expect to be the starting quarterback for SMU entering the year, he's played really well, Dawn, honestly, so far this season. Heading into the year, we mentioned it before, Preston Stone was expected to be the starting quarterback, and we had him as like a top 15 quarterback in the country for good reason. Last year, Preston Stone had a 91 passing grade. Only Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels had a higher passing grade last year than Preston Stone. So it was safe to say that when Kevin Jennings, I think you and I were in Ann Arbor when they announced that Jennings would be the starter the rest of this, or at least for the foreseeable future, and we were like looking at each other like, what are we doing here in SMU? So it was a surprise, obviously. I will say, though, Kevin Jennings has played really well recently. He has a 91.5 passing grade over the last 2 weeks. Only Jalen Monroe has a higher passing grade over the last 2 weeks than Kevin Jennings so far this year. And right now, Kevin Jennings, 9th among all quarterbacks in the country with an 88.9 passing grade without play action. And he's 13th in the country in passing grade under pressure at a 73.8 mark. And those two aspects specifically, I'm not just picking out stats he's really good in. Those two are going to be massive in this game because Louisville is 4th in the country in run defense grade at 93.3. They only allow 3.6 yards per carry. And Louisville has generated pressure on almost 42% of dropbacks this year, which is the 6th highest rate in the country. So you're talking about a Louisville defense and listen, Brashard Smith is actually the highest graded running back in the country now, even over Ashton Ginty. He has a 90-plus receiving grade and a 90-plus rushing grade. But I don't think this SMU offensive line against this Louisville defensive line is going to win too many battles. So if you're not able to run the ball, then you probably can't use play action that much. And Jennings has done really well without play action. And also, Louisville's going to get a lot of pressure on him probably too. But Jennings has also been really good under pressure too. So those two aspects make me think, hey, maybe SMU has got a shot against this Louisville defense because Jennings has done really well in the two areas that he'll probably need to do well in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for SMU, that's a big thing is if they can get Brashard Smith going. Because last week, honestly, Louisville, first of all, Louisville's defensive line is the quietest elite defensive line in the country.
Yep.
It's one of those units. It's played like a top 5 unit. Ashton Gelati and several other guys are playing awesome against the run and the pass. And last week against Notre Dame, they did a really good job against Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in shutting them down. Riley Leonard was actually Notre Dame's leading rusher, I believe, in that game. So and Notre Dame knew it. They had to go to quarterback run. They had to get the numbers game going. They had to find numbers and get more powerful than Louisville, and that's very hard to do. And then Leonard made enough throws to win the game, and Louisville made enough mistakes to lose the game. But this Louisville run defense is a real problem, and that's the one thing I think for Jennings. What happens if SMU does have to get one-dimensional in this game? Can he handle that? There were games last year where Preston Stone had to do it, and he handled it for the most part. But now if the spotlight is on Kevin Jennings, and he's a little bit more mobile than Stone is, especially after Stone's injury, and maybe that's a part of what went into Rhett Lashley's decision on that. But that it's going to be a big key. If this gets one-dimensional, if Louisville shuts down the run like they've been doing every single week, the pressure is on Jennings to now be the star of the show.
Absolutely. So, Dalton, will Louisville bounce back after a heartbreaking loss to Notre Dame last week, or will SMU establish themselves as the number 3 team in the ACC?
I still really like Louisville. And you look at the mindset after last week's loss, okay? It's not a conference loss. Realistically, Louisville would have had to win that game to get an at-large bid and get in that conversation. Probably wasn't going to happen anyway, right? And so we think about, okay, it's not a conference loss. At the end of the day, it sucks they lost for them, but really doesn't matter, right? Now you're in your first conference game. No, actually, second conference game. They beat Georgia Tech. Get it rolling, get 2-0 in the conference, and I think they're a really good football team. I've got Louisville 35-27. I think they're going to bounce back. I think they're really good, and I think they very easily could have beat Notre Dame. They just made mistakes from the first minute to the 60th minute last week, and they still had a chance with the ball to go down and tie the game and came up 40, 45 yards short. I like their defense a lot. I love their defensive line. I think they have balance on offense, and I do think they're going to find ways to exploit SMU's secondary because, again, outside the numbers, those cornerbacks for SMU, they really concern me in coverage in this game. I think Ja'Cory Brooks is in for a big game again.
Yeah, him and Colin Lacey, too. Colin Lacey finally back from injury.
Chris Bell playing well as well.
Yeah, Chris Bell, yeah. I got Louisville even by a bigger margin. I have them winning 34-24. I think they are the better team in this one. And I think they'll bounce back from their loss to Notre Dame last week. And I think Tyler Shuck will do pretty well. And I think Kevin Jennings, like I said, he's played really well. And I've been pleasantly surprised by Kevin Jennings. But I don't think he's played a defense quite like the Louisville defense just yet. So I think that they'll be able to win this game by 10 points and get back on track in their season. Dalton, the next one we're talking about is Iowa at number 3, Ohio State, which is a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time game on CBS. And the storyline to know, this is Ohio State's first test of the entire season. Dalton, we are in week 6 now of our preview shows. We have not talked about Ohio State once in our previews because their toughest opponent that Ohio State has played all year is Michigan State, who is number 75 in PFF's power rankings right now. Iowa is about a top 30 team in college football. So this will be the first major test for the Buckeyes before obviously their biggest test, maybe the whole season next week against Oregon in Eugene. But this is a kind of a good warm-up game for Ohio State. Not even a warm-up game because Iowa is a really good team as well. But I think this is a really interesting game, and this is the first time we're talking about Ohio State all year. It's actually fun to finally be talking about a top 3 team in the country.
Yeah, and to be talking about a game that they're playing against a team that actually stands a chance, right? And Iowa, to me, I know they lost to Iowa State, and that was a tight game, and they lost on a long field goal. But Iowa looks better than they did last year, I think. Who knows if they'll win more games? It's a little bit, they're not playing the true Big Ten West schedule anymore and all of that. But offensively, they look better. Defensively, they're always great because that's what they do. And to see Ohio State, I think especially to see Will Howard against this defense, right? We have the quarterback question still with Ohio State, and he hasn't played elite football yet. He's been good enough. It's kind of same old Will Howard where you put him in play action, and yeah, you get him playing good enough, and he's got freaks at receiver to work with for sure. But I think this is the moment where I go, okay, now we get to see the full playbook, the full offense, and not that they didn't use it against Michigan State last week, but going into the game, it's kind of why we didn't preview it. We didn't think Michigan State had much of a chance in that game, right? And I know Michigan State's improving, but this is a different level of football. I do think it's a level of football that Iowa can compete with, so we're going to have a lot of fun watching this one.
So, Dawn, you have the Iowa offense in this one, who actually has been looking better than we've seen from Iowa offense in the past, and really pretty much because of one player, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it is a better team effort, and one guy being this good makes your entire offense better. But, man, Caleb Johnson, how good has he been in this Iowa backfield? And, look, Iowa's scored at least 30 points in 3 of their first 4 games. They did it once all of last year. I believe that was against Western Michigan. Somebody lower. So. Yeah. But Caleb Johnson, this is a stud at running back that they have. He's big. He's blazing fast. He runs through contact. Look, he's the leading rusher in the Power 5 right now. The only guy in the country with more yards than him is Ashton Jeanty, and we know what Ashton Jeanty's doing, right?
Yeah.
89 rushing grade, 8.4 yards per carry, 30 missed tackles through his first 4 games. I mean, he's a real problem. You watch their offense, and under Tim Lester, their new offensive coordinator, they've gone to more of this kind of mid-zone, outside zone run game that's a little more. He spent a year with Green Bay and Matt LaFleur up there, and I think he might have taken something from LaFleur and Green Bay with this outside zone scheme, because if Caleb Johnson hits the hole and gets north and south, he's a real problem. This is a real player with real speed that I don't think Iowa fans are necessarily used to. PFF gas scores, right? Our game athleticism scores that we haven't talked about in a while, but sometimes we like to reference those. He's sitting at a 98.5.
Wow.
This is a blazer at tailback.
Basically, just so people know, that's basically your percentile of your in-game athleticism against other players at your position. So right now he's like a 98th percentile athlete, is what we're saying on running back.
I mean, this Caleb Johnson he's a real problem. He's problem number 1 when you're talking about Iowa, and they're run blocking a lot better this year because the scheme is simpler. They've gone to a simpler outside zone scheme. He's getting north and south, and even when he makes cutbacks, he gets in the open field. The speed is real, but he runs through contact as well. He's got everything you could want in a back. He's very quietly played like one of the best backs in the country so far, and it's going to be a real test if this gets to be a slow-paced, running the ball kind of game. Johnson can carry the load. I mean, against Minnesota, when they beat Minnesota, was it last week or the week before? He goes on air afterwards on an interview with NBC after, and he goes, "Look, I had to put the team on my back, and I won."
Hell yeah.
And that's just great. And look, Cade McNamara's at least functional back there, healthy. Luke Lachey's a good tight end. We got receiver. We got Reese Vanderzee, another true freshman receiver. But it's all centered around Caleb Johnson. And then Ohio State's got players to match it, though, right? Tyleik Williams is supposed to be back in the middle this week from injury. Jack Sawyer's a great run defender. Lathan Ransom at safety, highest graded run D safety in the country right now. And Ohio State is 5th as a team in run D grade. Again, they haven't played anybody great, but their defense has been as advertised so far. All those guys, plus Caleb Downs.
That's
plus
not
Denzel.
fake. No, Ohio State's defense is legit. We know that.
Ohio State's defense is fantastic. They have so much. They have NFL talent left and right on their defense. But Caleb Johnson's going to be problem number 1. And if he were to go for something, again, like if he were to carry the load for 150, 200 yards in this game, we've got a ball game.
Absolutely. And on the other side, too, you have 2 star running backs in Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. But Dolan, the matchup I'm looking forward to seeing is Ohio State's weapons against Iowa's secondary. Stop me if you heard this before. Ohio State has star receivers. Every single year we say this about Ohio State. Right now, the Buckeyes are one of only 2 schools in the country with multiple wide receivers who are among the top 15 in receiving grade this year in Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. Egbuka, obviously the veteran as a senior, 9th in the country with an 85.1 receiving grade this year. 240 yards after the catch, 6th in America as well. He's gotten a lot better after the catch this year than he was in the past. And then, of course, Jeremiah Smith. He's a phenom, man. What he's been doing this year is unbelievable. Leads all true freshmen with an 84.1 receiving grade, 17 receiving first downs or touchdowns, 8 more than any other true freshman. He was a number 1 recruit coming out of high school, and he's living up to that hype right now. He looks unbelievable as a true freshman. But they might not be able to run wild against Iowa. Iowa entered the year with my number 2 secondary in the country, and nothing this year has changed my thoughts on them. Right now, they're 6th in coverage grade this year at a 91.5, and in particular, Jamari Harris leads all corners in the nation with a 90.5 coverage grade this year. And Dalton, he has 8 combined pass breakups and interceptions. He's only allowed 5 catches. He has 3 more plays on the football than he's allowed catches this year. Jamari Harris, I know they lost Cooper DeJean. That was a huge loss. But Jamari Harris is the next lockdown corner at Iowa right now. So, again, Ohio State's receivers have looked unbelievable so far this year. But they haven't played the best competition. And now you're going up against an elite secondary in Iowa. I do think the receivers will do well. But the question is, like you said before, Will Howard. Can Will Howard in tight windows make those throws? That's the question I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I'm seeing answered in this game. And I think this is the best matchup maybe of the entire weekend.
I think you said it right with Jamari Harris outside at corner. He's a spectacular player. You still have Sebastian Castro in the slot. You got 2 really good safeties. You got 2 really good linebackers.
And Egbuka plays in the slot a lot too, so you'll probably see a lot of Castro.
If we get Castro versus Egbuka, you get Harris versus Smith. I mean, there's a lot of fun matchups in this game.
And Nwankpa back there, yeah.
And I think you're right. If we do get in a spot where this is run versus run, now we need to find out, okay, this is how good Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are too. I think Ohio State's still going to benefit from having balance, but there's a lot of ways this game could go. And again, I think if Iowa's secondary can keep them in it and stop those 2 freaks, especially on the outside, from just teeing off on them like they have the last few weeks, Egbuka, I'll tell you what, Emeka Egbuka looks 100% too.
Yeah.
I don't think the last couple weeks what I've seen from him, I don't think he looked like that at any point last year.
He's a first-round pick again.
Yeah, he sure looks like it. To have those 2 guys, that doesn't seem fair sometimes.
Definitely. So, Dalton, in Ohio State's first real test of the season, will they pass it, or will Iowa pull off a massive upset?
I think they'll pass it. But I don't like this game at the 19 or 20-point spread that it's at. I really don't. I think, look, we haven't seen Will Howard play elite football yet. He's had 3 games with his passing grade. 3 of his 4 games, his passing grade's under 70. He's playing good enough. It's kind of same old Will Howard. He's good on play action. I think one thing that benefits him in this game is that Iowa doesn't blitz hardly at all. They send 4 and they sit in quarters and they do what they do on defense. It's very predictable on defense. Just very good at it, right? I think this game does come down to just the 2 running games. And I think, are we going to see enough big plays from Judkins and Henderson, or does Caleb Johnson take this game over and Iowa control the ball, and we get into a situation where now we got a trench game, now we got a running game, and we got a defensive game, a low-scoring one. They really need to slow down the pace of this game, Iowa. If they get ahead, I think this gets very dangerous for Ohio State. I think it is a test, but I've got Ohio State 24-16. I do not like this as a 20-point spread. I don't think Iowa loses by 20+ in this game.
I do think they will lose by 20+ in this game. I got Ohio State win this one 33-13. I have exactly what the spread is actually. I think the defense will make it interesting early, but Iowa's run D has been good this year, but I think Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson can play well against them. And then once you do that, then if they start creeping up in the box a little bit, you got Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and all those other weapons they got there as well. And really the big thing why I like Ohio State big in this one is I just don't think Iowa's offense will be able to score enough. Honestly, I think they're going to be held under 20 points. I'd be surprised if they get over 20 points in this game. And if that happens, I think Ohio State will score probably at least 30 points, and then we'll see what happens from there. So I got Ohio State winning this one 33-13, just because I think their defense, if they really just key in on Caleb Johnson, Iowa's really going to be struggling probably offensively. So Ohio State, we both have winning that one. Next game we're talking about is number 12 Ole Miss at South Carolina, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. Storyline is okay, how does Ole Miss respond? Because the Rebels were on the wrong side of one of the biggest upsets last week. Despite being 15.5-point favorites at home, number 6 Ole Miss lost to Kentucky by a 20-17 final score. Now they're on the road against South Carolina, who's 3-1 on the season, and Dalton, that one loss came to number 13 LSU, in which they missed the potential game-tying field goal with no time left. And LSU is only one spot behind Ole Miss in the AP Top 25 right now. And also, Robbie Ashford played a lot of that game because Lenore Sellers suffered an ankle injury. Lenore Sellers is back now. So it stands to reason that if Sellers played that entire game against LSU, South Carolina might be 4-0 right now. We might be talking about a team that's in the top 15 of the AP poll right now. So also, South Carolina, they're coming off a bye week. So they've had 2 weeks to prepare for Ole Miss. So I'm really interested in seeing how Lane Kiffin and the Rebels respond after being upset last weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And they need to bounce back quick because this is a tough game. South Carolina's, that's a fun environment they got going over there. That's an elite defense they have, and they're starting to figure it out. They can really run the ball on offense, especially if Sellers is healthy. This is a game, if I'm Ole Miss, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous if I'm an Ole Miss person or Ole Miss fan or somebody on the coaching staff, because you mess around with this South Carolina defense. LSU learned and won at the buzzer, basically, and we've seen from Kentucky learn themselves. Look, this is a team. Kentucky just beat Ole Miss. South Carolina beat Kentucky 31-6.
Yep.
They were just dominant in that game. I think everybody's on notice now about what South Carolina is capable of. This is a dangerous game for the Rebels.
Absolutely. So, Dawn, you have the Ole Miss offense who looked sluggish in that game against Kentucky last week. So, how do they respond and how do they get back on track in this one?
So, watching that game, it felt to me like Ole Miss came out and thought they were just going to do what they did in their first few games and just run the ball at will and take shots downfield and everything would be easy. And suddenly it wasn't easy, and then trying to find a rhythm against a very good Kentucky defense was a problem. Threw the ball deep a lot early. Jackson Dart's average depth of target in the first half of that game was 16.6 yards. And in the game, he only completed 1 of 7 deep balls. That was the ball at the very end to Caden Priestcorn on the miracle scramble drill on 4th and 11, and only 3.7 yards per design carry in that game. He scrambled for a handful of yards, but when they tried to run the ball, when they called run plays, it didn't work. And when they tried to take shots downfield, Kentucky, you could see Kentucky sitting back like, look, we're not just giving up go balls all day. Okay. Yep. Here's the thing with Ole Miss. This has been a theme. When they lose, they don't run the ball, and they either take too many deep shots or it's just not effective. Let's go back to their 2 losses last year. Okay. Georgia and Alabama.
Yep.
Okay. In those 2 games, Jackson Dart went just 1 for 10 on deep balls combined. Okay. And they only had 4 yards flat per design carry in those 2 games. You take away the deep ball, and you somewhat take away the run game, the design run game, and you make Jackson Dart throw in a 15-ish yard bubble where he can't just, that he doesn't just have a Trey Harris or a Juice Wells or whoever just getting over the top because that's just what they do, double moves, running by you, whatever works. All of a sudden it gets choppy. And it feels like it felt last week like they were kind of punching a wall where it was like they weren't completing deep balls early. Then they have to figure out in the second half how to manufacture. And their best moments in that game are when they did. You could see it towards the end of the third quarter where they manufacture a drive. We run a little bit. We get 6-7 yards here and there. But Ole Miss gets impatient. And they want those big plays. They want those home runs. They want 60-yard touchdowns. And sometimes those just don't come. When you play a team like Kentucky with a good defense, like Bama, like Georgia, now like South Carolina, they don't just give you explosive plays. That's what makes them so great, is that you can't just line up and throw the ball 60 yards and walk into the end zone, right? So you're playing these elite defenses, and I think South Carolina's one of them. Look, we already know about their pass rush. Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard and all those guys they have up front. They got a freakish pass rush, and they've only allowed 10.4% of their opponent's pass plays to get at least 15 yards. I believe that's a top 25 mark in the country. They're really good in the secondary. They're really good with their pass rush. Ole Miss needs to find a run game here, okay? South Carolina, that's the one soft spot. We've seen it against LSU. We even saw it against Kentucky in a game they won. They had a lot of rushing yards in that game. It was just they couldn't pass protect against South Carolina. Kentucky, the pass protection's an issue. But look, South Carolina's allowed 4.7 yards per carry this year on design runs, 69th in the nation in run D grade. Ole Miss needs to come out and manufacture first downs earlier and create those shots with their run game, with the shorter passing game, drawing safeties up instead of just forcing home run shots down the field when teams are sitting back on them, because that's exactly what I saw last week, is that early in the game, they thought they were just going to run right by Kentucky, and it would be done, and the game would be over by halftime, and that would be it, and Jackson Dart had 400 yards in the first half. And then it wasn't like that, and they couldn't dial it back and play at the speed that Kentucky wanted them to play at. It reminded me so much of the Alabama game last year, especially. Alabama did not allow them to complete a deep ball, and this is what happens. Either they're going to manufacture first downs, or they're not, and if they're going to force shots and have Dart holding the ball back there against this pass rush, they're going to have another problem this week.
They absolutely will. And Dalton, I think there's a mismatch in that game with Ole Miss's offensive line against South Carolina's defensive line. It's the same thing on the other side of the ball. South Carolina's offensive line against Ole Miss's defensive line is a major issue for the Gamecocks. And listen, the good news for them is that Lenora Sellers, like I said before, is set to make his return. He was injured 3 weeks ago against LSU, sprained his ankle. But the bad news is he'll have one of the best D lines in the country breathing down his neck the entire game pretty much. Ole Miss right now leads the nation in defensive line grade at a 91.9, and the Rebels are first in run defense grade as a team at a 95.9, and tied for second in pass rushing grade at an 86, ironically tied with South Carolina in pass rushing grade this year. Ole Miss leads the nation in yards per attempt allowed at only 2.5 yards per attempt allowed, and they're second in the country with 113 total pressures this season. I believe only behind Miami this year in total pressures. 4 Rebels defensive linemen have earned 80-plus PFF grades this year, and Jared Ivey, Princely Monmielen, Walter Nolan, and Suntarine Perkins. 4 defensive linemen with 80-plus grades. That's nuts for them. And South Carolina, last year, what killed them and what killed Spencer Rattler was the offensive line was terrible. And their struggles have carried over into this season as well. So far, South Carolina's offensive line has a 60.9 grade as a unit, which is only at 99th in the country among 134 offensive lines. So South Carolina most likely is going to struggle to generate any push in the run game and also struggle to protect Lenora Sellers. And Dalton, a big issue with that too, if that ankle injury is still bothering him, he's not going to be as mobile and can't escape the pressure that much. So he's a sitting duck back there, honestly. If that ankle injury is still bothering him, we'll see if he does or not. But I'm worried about the South Carolina O-line against that Ole Miss defensive line, because that Ole Miss defensive line, like I said, is one of the best in college football right now.
Yeah, it's a huge question if South Carolina can get the run game going, because Sellers is such a big part of their run game. And 2 guys that I really like that you mentioned there for Ole Miss, Monmielen and Ivey, they were both really good last week. Ole Miss defense was good enough to win last week, and I know they gave up the last drive and the big Barryon Brown catch and all. They were good enough to win last week. I think any week that Ole Miss only gives up even 20 points, they feel like they should win, right? I think last week was on their offense. Their front 7 is playing a lot better. All those transfer guys, even Walter Nolan in the middle, is playing really well. I think better than at any point we saw at Texas A&M. Their defense seems to be good enough, right? Now they need to really get back into the creativity and doing a lot of things on offense that made them successful, instead of, again, just punching a wall and trying to get 60-yard bombs all day.
Yeah, definitely. So, Dalton, will Ole Miss bounce back after being upset by Kentucky last week, or will South Carolina establish themselves as a top 25 team in the country?
I'm staying on the Ole Miss bandwagon. I won't lie to you. I have Ole Miss 31 and South Carolina 24, but I'm nervous about it. I'm very nervous about it, because if you're trying to get your offense right on a week where they did not play well at all, this is not the team you want to do it against. Honestly, you've got this pass rush and Dylan Stort and these guys with your offensive line as kind of the one weak spot on your offense, and you've got the South Carolina secondary is really good too. It's a combination. Their entire pass defense is a problem. Once again, I think South Carolina, very much like the LSU game, if this game gets down to their speed, and it's about running the ball, and it's about defense, and it gets to be like the Kentucky game last week, this is a problem, because honestly, I think we saw it head-to-head. I would argue South Carolina's better than Kentucky. And now you're on the road. And that's a hostile environment too. And they're going to know, they're going to watch last week's tape and go, oh, they're vulnerable.
Yep.
I don't care if they're top 5, top 10, top 20, whatever. They're vulnerable. And they've shown it. And they've gotten the scary part to me for Ole Miss. Their last 3 losses, 2 last year and this one this year, they all look the same. We're not hitting deep shots. We're not running the ball great. You do those 2 things. I think Ole Miss, I've told you this before, how LSU turned that game around against South Carolina. You want to beat this defensive line, you have to run the ball well, You have to play with tempo. Okay, if Ole Miss can't get in a rhythm and can't get first downs and do those things, they're in big trouble. I'm going to stay on it. I think Lane Kiffin will find a better game plan than he did last week. I think Jackson Dart and Trey Harris and those guys, I think they'll have it enough together to win this game, but I'm very nervous about it. I will sit here and tell you of all these results, I might be the least sure about this one out of all of them, because Ole Miss, there's a formula to beat them. There is. In South Carolina, they have the tools to use that same formula.
Yeah, I'm a little more confident than you. I have Ole Miss winning this one 35-20. I think this will be a game where the defensive lines really steal the show. And in that kind of game, I just think if Ole Miss's defensive line can play as well as I think, and I think Ole Miss is a better offensive line than South Carolina does too. I think if that happens, I trust Lane Kiffin and I trust Jackson Dart and those receivers more than I trust the South Carolina offense to make stuff happen. So that's why I think they'll win 35-20. But I'm with you. I think it really could come down to which defensive line plays better, honestly, and because I think both will be dominant in this one. But I think that the Ole Miss one will be unblockable, whereas the South Carolina one will also generate a lot of pressure and a lot of great run defense plays. But I think the Ole Miss offense will do enough. I think Lane will do enough to mitigate the damage that the defensive line does. So I got Ole Miss winning this one 35-20, get back on track after losing last week to Kentucky. So next one we're talking about, Dalton, is number 10 Michigan at Washington, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC. Storyline is very simple. It's a national championship rematch. Last year, obviously, the national title game between Michigan and Washington. Michigan won that game 34-13. Both schools, safe to say, look really different from last year's squads. Obviously, you have two brand new head coaches for both these schools, as Jim Harbaugh left for the Chargers and Kalen DeBoer left for Alabama. So now you got Sharon Moore getting promoted from offensive coordinator to head coach, Jed Fish coming in from Arizona to Washington. It's been a mixed bag so far for Michigan and Washington. Michigan suffered their first regular season loss in 3 years a few weeks ago to Texas that we were actually at. But then they made their way back into the top 10 by beating number 11 USC a couple weeks ago. Washington off to just a 3-2 start this season. They've lost to Washington State and Rutgers so far. But even so, even though Washington is unranked and only 3-2 on the season, and even though Michigan is number 10 in the country, Washington is favored at home against the Wolverines. So I'm excited to see this national title game rematch, and it'll look completely different from last year's game probably.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to see Michigan as an underdog in this spot. It makes you. It's one of those ones where it makes you think they know something, right? I don't know if they know something we don't know we're recording this on a Tuesday, but it seems odd. Because I know Michigan's had their struggles.
It's the weirdest spread of the week, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
And Michigan's had their struggles, obviously the quarterback stuff, but they're leaning into Alex Orji in the run game and just running the ball constantly, right? And, the big win against USC. Last week, a tight win against Minnesota. But, I mean, Minnesota's not horrible either. That's a competitive team with a good defense, and they're good in the trenches. I mean, it feels odd, especially with Washington coming off a loss to Rutgers, right? So I think – I don't know if they know something we don't know, but we're gonna analyze it as we always do, and we'll see what we have for the picks here. But it's an odd feel to see that. Is it just a West Coast trip thing too?
Might be
going out to Seattle and having to play that game.
It's not that far, right? It's not like
from Michigan.
From Michigan, it's a little far, but it's not like a cross country like the next game we're talking about, Miami and Cal, right?
I mean, kind of. It's still 3 time zones. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's still far.
I mean,
it's far.
It's not like they're playing at 9 a.m. either.
No,
so
true,
it's like, it is that. But I mean, it just something about it feels weird.
Weird. It's very weird.
Yeah.
I don't know why this spreads like this. We'll get into the scores later, but yeah. So what? Tell me about you have the Washington offense in this one. So what should we be looking out for when the Huskies have the ball?
There's been a lot of question marks with Michigan, right? It's kind of the thing we came into the year kind of guessing and figuring out, okay, what do we still have from last year? What can our new guys do? What can a new quarterback do? And all the new stuff on offense and replacing NFL players, doing all that. But there is one constant, and that is their defensive line. And it still may be the best defensive line in the country, especially their front four when you talk about Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore, and Josiah Stewart. Doesn't get much better than that.
3 first-round picks on the D-line.
3 first-round picks, and Derek Moore is getting drafted too at some point. If it's not first round, he's getting drafted. And look, you look at their defensive line, overall grade, they're 4th, run D grade, they're 10th. Best pass rush grade in the country from a defensive line, 4th most sacks, 8th in pass rush win rate. This is the unit, especially I think over the last 2 weeks. We saw it in that USC game. They were just dominant. this is the unit that takes games over, and they allow their offense chances to run the ball and work the ball downfield and score just enough points. They've gotten 27 points in each of the last 2 weeks. And then secondary still got, obviously, with Will Johnson hanging out back there. Don't throw at him. I mean, I don't know when they'll learn not to throw at him, but, Texas learned it, and they beat Michigan. So either way, you got a defensive line that is the constant, and this is the best set of players for Michigan, okay? You look at Washington's offensive line. All the hype was about, losing Michael Penix and the receivers and the head coach, right? 5 new starters on the offensive line, and they're still kind of waiting for it to gel all the way, okay? And I mean, look, right now, 89th in the country in overall grade. Their offensive line with a 63.4 overall grade. And if you bring that down, if you take out 2 games against non-Power 5 teams, it's like 102nd. And they're 120th in run blocking. And look, Jonah Coleman's really, really good. We saw him at Arizona last year, and he's awesome for Washington this year. One of the best backs in the country. But you got to find a way to block against a team like this. And look, their last 3 games, they've lost 2 of them, scored 24 points or less. So if we've got a low-scoring game here, who does this favor? Michigan.
Yeah.
That's the game they want to play, is 24 points or less, right? So look, it's going to be a problem. It is going to be a problem between Jonah Coleman trying to find holes and Will Rogers. Look, the one thing that's kind of holding up Washington's pass protection, even though they're still trying to gel, is Will Rogers gets rid of the ball really quickly. 2.48 second average time to throw. One of the fastest in the country, okay? But at some point, you have to block people. And these are the people for Michigan that you have to block. And if you can't do it, they're going to take the game over. So that's really the matchup I'm watching, is Washington with, again, 5 new starters on the offensive line. Yes, they're playing their 6th game together, but it's still not gelling, I don't think, the way that Jed Fish wants it to. And now they're playing arguably the best defensive line in the country.
Yeah, definitely. And other side of the ball, I mean, so you got Jonah Coleman, who's probably going to be really relied on as Washington's, main source of offense is Jonah Coleman. But they could also throw the ball a little bit. Michigan is really relying on that run game, and that's it, honestly. So my matchup to watch is, can Washington make Alex Orji win as a passer in obvious passing situations? Can they get Michigan behind the chains, honestly, in this one? So Michigan a couple weeks ago made the switch to Alex Orji from Davis Warren at quarterback, and since then, they've been completely reliant on their run game. Michigan has run the ball on 65.5% of their plays over the last 2 weeks. Only Iowa has a higher rate in the Power 4. We've already went over how reliant Iowa is on Caleb Johnson. Michigan is right behind them in run rate over the last 2 weeks. And we're talking about close games, too. We're talking about games where Michigan feasibly should be throwing the ball. Like that USC game, they had a 2-minute drill on their own, 20-yard line, and they still ran the football.
Down 4 points?
Yeah, down 4, and they needed to get down the field, and they're like, no, we're still running the football. And luckily, Kalel Mullings broke off that 60-yard run, and obviously they scored the touchdown on a 4th and goal to win that game. And speaking of Kalel Mullings, he has been the star for Michigan's offense this year. Donovan Edwards was on the cover of EA College Football 25, and we did a great interview with him, and we love Donovan Edwards. But Kalel Mullings has been the lead back for the Wolverines this year. Currently 8th in the country in rushing yards at 540 and 9th in the country in yards after contact at 363. Right now, Washington does lead the Power 4 in tackling grade at an 82.3, but they've been pretty average in run defense overall. Right now, they're 67th in the country in EPA per run, and they are 57th in the country with 4.5 yards allowed per carry. So if Michigan can stay ahead of the chains, they're going to win this game. But if Orji is forced into obvious passing situations, that opens a door for the Huskies, because right now Alex Orji has the 5th worst passing grade in the Power 4 this year at a 53.4 mark. So if you make him throw a lot in this one, that significantly favors the Huskies. But if you allow Kalel Mullings to run all over you, that's where Michigan should win this game.
I will give Sharon Moore and Michigan credit, because we had this quarterback controversy. At one point, it was a 5-man competition. Yep. Then it was down to 2. It was down to Davis Warren and Alex Orji. And at the very least, okay, they tried Warren. They tried to get a true passing game going. Didn't work, okay? If you're going to play a guy like Alex Orji, just lean into it.
Yep.
Right? Lean into it, and we've got 3 rushing threats in Orji and Mullings and Edwards, and just go all the way and see how far you can take it, because the reality set in very quick that they just don't have a passing game this year.
Yep.
And once in a while, they'll get the ball to Colson Loveland, and once in a while, they'll run some RPOs, but that's it. So Look, play to your identity. And their identity is playing defense and running the football as much as possible. And honestly, I know you mentioned it against USC. They had enough time to keep trying to run the football until they never had to throw the football after the big run. But as long as they don't get down 2 scores, keep at it.
Yeah.
Just keep hitting the gas and keep letting your defense play.
So, Dalton, in the surprising spread of the week, it is Washington favored by 2.5 or 3 points, wherever you look at right now. Do you agree with that? Do you think Washington at home beats a top 10 team in Michigan, or will Michigan once again beat Washington?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to find something out in the days leading up to this game that we should know about, or something surprising that's going to come along. But I have to take Michigan in this game. I just think their defense, of the 4 units on the field, their defense is the best one. And look, Washington has good players. I think their secondary is good. Their coverage unit's good, but I don't think that matters as much in this game. Jonah Coleman's really good. We know that. Will Rogers is at least solid. He's reliable at quarterback, but I think it takes a different level of quarterback to really, when you talk about trying to shred this Michigan defense, especially with Will Johnson sitting out there, and this pass rush. I just think it just feels off to me. I just feel like I kind of have to pick Michigan here, don't I? I just think their defensive line can take over this whole game. I really do. I just in the trenches. And look, not only are they running the ball better, they're starting to run block a little bit better. They're at least getting in the groove, and their linemen can lean forward and get into the run game. But I have Michigan 24-13. I just think their defense is the best unit on this field.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a 28-14 in this one. And I mentioned before in our storyline breakdown how, it's a rematch of the national title game, but these two teams are completely different than last year. Ironically, I think it'll be very similar to the national title game. I think Michigan's run game is going to dominate, just like it did in the national title game last year. And the defense for Michigan is going to be too much for Washington to handle, just like it was last year in the national title game as well. So even though they're completely different, two different teams, I think it'll look a lot like the national title game. And Washington fans probably be having PTSD from that national title game.
Certainly with Mason Graham sitting in there in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
That was the dominant player in that game, and that's one of the few guys that's really returning here.
Definitely. So we both have Michigan in an upset, I guess, if you want to call it, beating Washington. But we'll get into our upset picks later. But that one, if we didn't preview this game, Dalton, I think you and I and Eli probably would have been sprinting to try to get the Michigan one before anyone else.
We'd be fighting over it for sure. Yeah.
All right, last one we're talking about is number 8 Miami at California. It is a 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time game on ESPN. The storylines know all eyes are on Berkeley, California this weekend. For the first time ever, the Golden Bears are hosting ESPN's College Game Day, and there's only 6 Power 4 programs who've never hosted the show now. So Cal crossed it off now. They're officially hosting College Game Day. And even after losing to Florida State last week, they're still off to a solid 3-1 start to their season. And right now they're a top 45 team in PFF's power rankings right now. And a team that's actually below Cal in the ranking is Virginia Tech, who nearly upset Miami last weekend. They had a completed Hail Mary that was overturned on the final play of the game. So the Hurricanes now going cross-country, trying to shake off that scare against Virginia Tech and going up against a seemingly better team now in California, where that stadium is probably going to be rocking with College Game Day there and all that. So it's really interesting to see how Miami responds now against a Cal team that is, like I said, has all eyes in that program for the first time in a long time.
For sure, and Cal had a big win a few weeks ago at Auburn. Had a tough loss to Florida State, but looking to bounce back in the ACC and adjust to life in the ACC and getting their first ACC home game, too. So we'll see where that goes. Miami, first conference game. Vatek got the run game going on him. I mean, obviously, you have 2 good backs. Jade Knott leading the way there, but for Cal. But I think it's a weird spot for Miami, and I think this is the first time. I think it's the first time that we're really seeing now the east to west, the real cross country going back thing, and it's going to be a weird thing all year in the ACC. Or we saw Stanford going all the way out to Syracuse. We're going to see it obviously all season now, but it's a weird cross country trip for Miami, especially coming off the game that they played last Friday.
Definitely. So, Don, you have the Miami offense. So what should we know when Heisman Trophy candidate Cam Ward has a football in this game?
I mean, look, we've found out already that Cam Ward is tough to stop, to say the least. This offense is rolling. Xavier Restrepo and all their receivers and Damian Martinez in the run game, when they get that going, they've got a lot of weapons, and Cam Ward's playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But there is a kryptonite still. Okay, Cam Ward came into this year with more turnover-worthy plays than big-time throws in his career, and it's gotten better. It's a better ratio this year, but 3 turnovers last week that really are the thing that kept Virginia Tech in the game, right? And especially we see Cam Ward sometimes when he's trying to improvise or just trying to fit balls into tight windows where, okay, he's a little loose with the football. He makes great throws into tight windows too, but you get kind of this thing. I think he's got, 47 career fumbles now?
Probably, yeah.
I know he had 46 through the first. I think last week was his first fumble. I could be wrong on that. But that's what you have to do with Cam Ward. If you're going to win, you got to force turnovers. Luckily for Cal, look, they're 16th in the nation in coverage grade right now. 10 interceptions lead the nation, 6 of them by an excellent cornerback duo in Marcus Harris and Noel Williams. Got a good secondary. That they're ball hawks, and they want to get the football. And if they can do that, and if they can close those windows or fool Cam Ward into throwing into a window that he thinks is there, that's how you have to beat Miami. I really believe that. You do. I think you have to get in a high-scoring game, but you have to force him into mistakes. And I think Cal has at least shown now, have they played an elite passing game like Miami's? Absolutely not. Look, the 4 teams that they've played.
Auburn's not doing it for you?
Not yet. Florida State.
Poor ZT.
Their first 4 opponents combined have a 75.5 passing grade, and that's nowhere near where Cam Ward is at. So if Cal is going to win, they have to win the turnover battle and win it significantly.
Definitely. On the other side of the ball, we have another mismatch, Dalton, with offensive line against defensive line. Because this Miami defensive line is one of the best in the country, and this Cal offensive line is not one of the best in the country right now. Right now, Cal's front 5 is currently the 7th lowest graded offensive line in the Power 4 with a 59.3 grade as a unit. They've allowed a sack or hit on 18.8% of their pass blocking snaps this year. That's the 9th highest rate in college football. But luckily for them, their quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, has been really good this year. He has the 27th best grade under pressure at a 67.2. So he's solid under pressure. He'll likely need to be good under pressure again this week against Miami, who entered the year with my number 3 D-line in the country, and they're currently 2nd in the country in defensive line grade at an 89.8. Right now, the Hurricanes lead the nation in pressure rate at 45.8%. And the craziest part about all that, Dawn, 2nd highest grade D-line in the country, lead the nation in pressure rate. Ruben Bain Jr. has played 3 snaps this year. 3. Their best defensive lineman has played 3 snaps. He played 3 snaps in the season opener and then got hurt. Mario Cristobal confirmed this week he's back. Ruben Bain is back. So you're talking about a Miami defensive line that has dominated this entire season, and now you're adding your best defensive lineman that you haven't had practically all year. That spells a lot of trouble for California in this game. So I'm excited to see Ruben Bain back. We had him as our, I believe, number 6 edge in the country coming into this year. He had an unreal true freshman season last year. In fact, he had the 2nd highest pass rushing grade we've ever seen by a true freshman. The only one above him was Myles Garrett, who's one of, if not the best defensive player in the NFL right now. So Ruben Bain Jr. is back this week. And again, Miami's D-line without him was one of the best in the country. And now they add him back. It's like, okay, this could be an unblockable unit. So I'm really excited to see if Cal can do anything against this Miami defensive line that's been one of the best in America.
No, absolutely. It's a big advantage for Miami. And that's really, we've talked about the 2 big problems when you're playing against Miami is how do we disturb Cam Ward and how in the world do we block this front 4, right? And I think if you can find a way to block him and give yourself time, I think Miami's secondary is good but not as elite as their defensive line. And Mendoza, it's going to be on him, and I think he is better when he works in rhythm and he has that first read and he knows where to go with the football. I think that's the one thing he's not going to want to do in this game is hold the football longer than he needs to, because it's going to be a problem. That's just the way Miami's defensive line works. If you hold the ball, you're asking for it. And Mendoza's not as mobile as a guy like Kyron Drones last week, right? Where Drones can escape and he's got a big body. Like Mendoza's a pocket quarterback. So it's a challenge for sure. And for Cal's offensive line and really for their entire team, this is a big step up from what they've played so far this year.
Definitely. So Dalton, in this cross-country game for Miami, will Miami spoil the first college game day for Cal, or with all the bright lights on Berkeley, will the Golden Bears pull off a massive upset?
I have to like Miami in this game. Cam Ward's playing too well. The defensive line is a huge mismatch. And look, Cal can score some points for sure if they get in rhythm, especially in the passing game down the sidelines, and they get a little bit of run game going. Cal can score, but I just think there's serious trench advantages here for Miami. Even their offensive line that played really well last week, especially as the game went on. Got some run game going in the second half, and they protect Cam Ward reasonably well. He can improvise reasonably well. It's kind of this symbiotic thing they have going right now. Miami's just, they're really darn good. They're what? They're number 7 in the country right now. Number 8. They're number 8. They're well deserving of that ranking. I think if you told me, hey, Miami's the 8th best team in the country, they should win this game. Yeah, I've got Miami 42-24. I think there's too many mismatches and too much talent on the Hurricanes side.
Yeah, I have it very slightly closer than that. I have 35-21. I just think that this defensive line is going to feast on Cal's offensive line, and Cam Ward has continued to show that, hey, I can be a Heisman Trophy candidate every single week, and he won that game against Virginia Tech at the very end of it. I think he'll add to his Heisman campaign with a strong performance. I do think Cal's secondary is pretty good, so maybe they'll keep it interesting for a little bit, but I think Miami will pull away and ultimately win this game. 35-21, final score. So, Dalton, I didn't do this at the top, but you and I actually have all the same picks in all 6 of these games. I currently have a 1-game lead on you right now.
It's about the long game. I don't need to make it up this week.
I'm 23-7 this year. You're 22-8.
I don't need to make it up this week.
Shout out Arizona. Shout out Arizona for that massive.
That's a big one.
Well, and I think we disagreed on another one too. You picked Louisville, and
I had Bama.
Notre Dame, and you had Bama to make up for it.
Yeah, so you having Notre Dame and Arizona put you ahead. Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So that was huge. So we actually disagree. We agreed on all these games this week. So you will guaranteed be going into that October 12th mega weekend still behind me.
Oh, that's the fun one.
But I can guarantee you we're probably going to be disagreeing on some of those games, considering how good those games are.
That's going to be
so that'll be interesting. But one thing, so I'm ahead of him right now. You and I are still trailing Eli, Dalton, in our upset picks. Eli has 314 points on the year. I am ahead of you now. You have given me a lot of flack for not hitting one at all this year. Now I'm ahead of you because I had BYU over Baylor, which is a lot like the Michigan over Washington one, where it was like, how is BYU underdog in here? But I'll take it. So BYU hit for me. You haven't hit one since what, week 1?
Yeah,
was your first one?
Got the first one. I had a couple of close calls. I had USF last week, which didn't go so well. But you know what? It's hard. Picking upsets straight up is hard.
I told you it's hard.
On top of the fact that we did it multiple times in our actual picks last week. So maybe we got to just stop any upsets. We got to just stop putting them in the regular games. Maybe that's it.
Definitely. So, all right, let's see if you can get back on track after missing, 5 straight?
4.
4 straight? 4 straight. I'll give you credit. 4 straight. So you missed 4 straight, Dalton. So which one are you going to try to break that streak here?
I'm going to continue to fade Oklahoma State. I do not like what's going on there and what we've seen really all season, but especially the last couple weeks in their losses to Utah and to K-State. They are hosting West Virginia. West Virginia's got this weird thing. They're off to a very similar start. They were last year, kind of slow and maybe starting to find a rhythm on offense. And this Oklahoma, look, West Virginia's secondary has struggled, to say the least.
Yeah.
This is going to go one of 2 ways for me. Either they're going to get right, and Oklahoma State is really struggling, and they're basically out of Big 12 contention because they can't get Ollie Gordon going, and Alan Bowman's struggling. And if you look at Alan Bowman, he's been okay, but in the 3 Power 5 games he's played this year, he's had right around a 55 passing grade in all 3 of them. So they're relying on kind of very mediocre production from their passing game, and they've still got nothing out of Ollie Gordon. Colin Oliver's still hurt. They're struggling in run defense. And at the very least, I know for West Virginia, they have Garrett Green, they have Jaheim White, they have C.J. Donaldson. They're going to come in there running the ball. And if Green's basically had 2 really good games and 2 not so good games. If you get a good one out of Garrett Green, they can go in there and win as long as Dejon Stribling and those receivers don't carve them to shreds. Maybe it'll just be a high-scoring game, but I'll take West Virginia going into Stillwater and handing Oklahoma State another home loss.
I like it. So, Eli, you're currently heavily in the lead right now. You have basically 170 points or 180 points more than any one of us. So, what is your upset pick going to be this week?
I didn't really like a lot on the board this week, so we're going to stick with some action. Hope it gets crazy. I'm going to take Miami over Toledo at plus 205. Like the odds. Think action can get kind of crazy. So hopefully it stays that way.
Miami, Ohio over Toledo.
He's right about that. Usually, especially with those 2 teams close scoring,
Yep.
tight defensive games, and there's a lot of those played in the MAC, but they're two of the best defenses in the conference for sure. It's probably going to be low scoring. 6.5, I think the spread is in that game in Toledo's favor. That seems a little wide. I know Toledo's played really well this year, but you got two good defenses. That might come down to the wire for him.
So I'm going to go with one that is going to hurt me.
Out of obligation?
Not out of obligation. I do think they're going to win. It's going to hurt me if they lose, and I'm going to feel double the happiness if they win, considering this is my school, and also I got it right. And my boy Donnie, who's in the chat right now, who actually, before this became a PFF show, he helped me out on this show, actually, making this a show. So shout out Donnie. He also agrees with me. Syracuse plus 190. That's the pick. I'm taking Syracuse plus 190 over UNLV on Friday night in Las Vegas. I know Malik Williams looked great in that win against Fresno State.
You just had him as a standout 2
I
days
just
ago.
did, but he's running into a buzzsaw that is a Syracuse Orange right now. So I'm taking Kyle McCord, continuing or maybe becoming a Heisman candidate after this week against UNLV, and the Syracuse Orange will go in there and beat the UNLV Rebels. I will actually be at my cousin's wedding during this one with my brother, who's currently a sophomore at Syracuse, and we will be probably checking our phones the entire night. I'm very excited for the wedding, Taylor. I'm very excited. I'm really excited to celebrate your love with Lindsay. But at the same time, I'm very nervous for the Syracuse game, and I'm going to have to keep an eye on this game.
I think you should be. I think. Look, UNLV after the Sluka situation and Malik Williams starting now to go out and beat a good Fresno State team 59-14. That's quietly one of the most impressive wins of the week last week, because Fresno State's a good team, and 59-14 is not a joke. I think you're in trouble down there. I won't lie to you.
Well, I don't think you saw what Syracuse did to Holy Cross last week, though.
They kept their composure.
They kept their composure, 42-14 over Holy Cross. So
it's not 59-14.
That's not true, but 42-14 over Holy Cross.
Ironically, Matt Sluka's old school.
But bias aside, I really do think Syracuse is going to win this game over UNLV. I think Kyle McCord and those Syracuse D line's playing pretty well too. So Syracuse plus 190. I'm going to continue my hot streak and get this one right, or I'll be very depressed on Sunday morning. We'll just put it that way. So speaking of Sunday morning, that will be our next show for our Week 6 review show, going over the biggest results from a Week 6 in college football. So make sure you guys tune in Sunday morning at 9 a.m. for our Week 6 review show. But for producer Eli, producer Tyler back there, for Dalton Wasserman, I'm Max Chadwick, and we'll see you guys on Sunday morning for our Week 6 review show.